Hi viewers, welcome to this session on planning for learning. We Indians learn English, the foreign tongue, with the primary goal of developing a functional or working knowledge for sharing intellectual and spiritual heritage. Therefore, English is taught as a second language with the goal of developing the skill of comprehension, listening and reading, and those of production, speaking and writing. The three dominant theories of learning, namely behaviorism, cognitivism and constructivism, have been applied in English as second language classrooms. All the theories agree with the postulate that language is to be used by the learner to attain its mastery. We have also learned that there are different approaches to language, communicative approach and structural approach being the prominent ones. Depending upon the accepted approach, different methods have been spelt out, like the direct method and the bilingual method. Variety strategies and techniques also have been developed accordingly. When we say that the use of language by the learner is the goal of teaching English, communication in the target language for sharing ideas, emotions and desires become the strategy. As we know, communication is always a two-way process. This indicates that teaching learning experience in an English classroom must accept interaction as the strategy. The teacher-learner, learner-learner and learner-learning material pairs form the receptive and productive poles of interaction. The interactions can be rooted on a T methodology or an L methodology. In T methodology, the learners are forced to communicate using the language by the teacher. A desirable environment is developed by the teacher by providing variety learning materials. Learner learns to use the language through the teacher developed interactive situations. When we accept the L methodology, the learner uses the language to learn it. Original language of the learner is tried out by him for communicating his creative ideas regarding a topic or an event which is directly related to the immediate situation of the learner. Thus, contextual learning is being used by the learners functionally. For example, the learner may be provided with a context to learn the format of a formal letter. The teacher makes the learners discuss an imaginary situation and provides a model letter. Instead, if there is a felt problem like water scarcity, the class may make use of such a real need, and an interaction on this particular need can automatically lead to writing a formal letter to the head of the institution. An efficient English teacher will be adapting the strategies and techniques in tune with the characteristics of the learners, availability of a conducive learning environment with infrastructural facilities and his own teaching competencies. In such a language-rich environment, the learner will be naturally picking up the language in order to interact with others. In other words, he will acquire the language by using it in real communicative contexts. In the formal environment of a classroom, usually such real-like interactive situations will be created by teacher interventions. From this brief review on English language acquisition and the related factors, it is clear that the teacher's vision as a skilled technician in identifying and formulating appropriate techniques, as a psychologist in understanding learner characteristics, and as an artist in designing live context is crucial in the success or otherwise of the interactive sessions. The active learning time, ALT, the amount of time spent by the learners actively engaged in the interactions, and the quality of instruction can be managed by the teacher by designing effective techniques. While selecting techniques for different teaching styles, the teacher brings in some sort of in-depth psychological level of analysis. Thus, the teacher has to systematize the procedure through quality control. The diversity and flexibility of learner factors are to be accounted for. Through scientific planning, the vision of the teacher can be translated into reality. The objectives, accepted methods, available resources and techniques of assessment serve as the anchor points in planning the design. To ensure successful results, planning must be based on certain general principles. Principles of planning. The principles of value, appropriateness, variety and involvement form the basis of pre-planning. Relevant and meaningful situational strategies must be developed and at the planning stage itself. The practicality of the selected strategies must be foreseen. Then only pre-planning will help and direct classroom interactive processes. Thus, the first principle of planning is that of value and practicality. Since the characteristics related to the learners and the learning environment are the base for formulating the objectives, learning experiences and evaluation techniques, the principle of appropriateness is to be followed. As the third principle, to avoid the boredom of repetition and to meet individual differences, learning resources and experience must have variety. Making use of quite similar and familiar strategies will not be motivating or interesting and therefore will be of less value. Involvement of learner participation is the fourth principle in planning. Since the learners have to communicate using the target language, the strategy should ensure active learner involvement. We should bear in mind that all the set objectives may not be achieved by all the learners always. During the classroom process, change in planned procedure will be necessary. That is why the plan is to be flexible. The principle of flexibility states that the teacher has the freedom to apply any number of variety techniques. Thus, value, appropriateness, variety in strategy, learner involvement and flexibility in planning represent effective planning by a creative teacher. Planning does not end up with teaching and learning. The sixth principle is that of evaluation and feedback. There must be effective techniques to evaluate the extent of realization of the objectives, appropriateness of the selected method, strategies and techniques as well as the effect of learning contexts. Designing effective evaluation techniques also form the principle of meaningful planning. Lesson planning. The success of any purposeful activity, however short it may be, depends on different phases like setting the stage, systematic action and perfect completion. In the process of teaching, the first step, namely the preparing stage, is the anchor point which determines the effectiveness of the entire process. Planning a lesson is the experience in anticipating teaching, an emotional experience in advance. In imagination, the teacher faces his students in a teaching learning environment, interacts with them, faces a few problems, solves the situation and successfully realized the objectives. This mental rehearsal provides the classroom teacher with confidence, sense of direction, ways to confront reality. Every teacher must be prepared, as there is nothing as fatal to a teacher's progress as unpreparedness. Both the well-experienced and the beginner teacher should pre-plan the lesson. Defining lesson plan. A lesson plan, the plan of action, is a comprehensive chart, a flexible, systematic approach for teaching. This blueprint of teaching learning process functions as a guide map for action. Lesson planning is a skill, an experience in which knowledge, insight, vision, competence, intelligence and creativity of the teacher play vital roles. C.V. Good has defined lesson plan as an outline of the important points of a lesson arranged in the order in which they are to be presented to student by the teacher. A good teacher gives shape to the lesson plan first mentally and then he gives a concrete, realistic touch when the same is transferred into written form. The continuity and smooth flow of the process is ensured through a variety of well-knit, interconnected, associated activities. The teacher can organize and systematize the whole process towards attainment of definite goal, the definite objective for each day's work. Economy of materials, energy and time can be ensured by avoiding needless repetitions and by following the principles of planning. Every phase in planning can be drafted, reviewed, edited and modified to extract maximum results. Every lesson plan will be unique in terms of the learner's levels, learning environment, learning strategies and the definite objectives. This tentative plan is only a means to realize the objectives, and so it must be flexible. Unforeseen situations, diverse responses of the learners and other problems will surely intervene, and the teacher will have to take deviant paths. Lack of expected prerequisites, ineffectiveness of selected techniques, change in available time, all these demand on time changes. An adapting teacher will be quick at tailoring his plans to meet immediate requirements. Prerequisites for planning lesson. For effective planning, the teacher has to systematically find answers to a few situations, and the same should find place in the lesson plan. What should be achieved? The objective. With what? The learner, the content, the resources. In what context? The available classroom situations. When? Sequence of activities. How? Grouping of students. How well? Techniques of evaluation. Variables in planning. Lessons are visualized as sequences of activities integrating contextual variable and individual differences. The different steps involved in advanced planning are obtaining information about the teaching situation, examining available texts and literary selections, gathering materials, preparing materials, identifying possible classroom activities and methods, teacher role and the procedure for evaluation. Based on the objectives, the teacher can direct learner activities, arrange learning environment and act as a resource. The role of the learner and the teacher will be specified in the lesson plan. The aforesaid variables in turn are dependent upon the general theory of teaching and learning English. In the perspective of the behaviorist, the teacher develops context through which the learner learns to use the language. Expected specific behavioral changes happen through teacher controlled situations. At the pre-planning phase, a teacher has to find answers to the three fundamental questions involved in the process of learning-centered teaching. They are, where am I going? Or where should my student reach? How could I get there? Or how can I make my students reach there? How will I know when I have arrived? Or how can I make my student know when he has reached the destination? Here, destination correspond to the learning objectives, the how in the second question correspond to the teaching learning process or experiences, and the third question corresponds to the evaluation procedure. These questions make classroom learning systematic and objective based. We can identify certain definite steps in the process of planning. They are: step 1, specify the objectives. It will facilitate selection of learning activities and evaluation of learning activities. Step 2, pre-access learners. Through diagnosis, the chances of realization of the specific objectives could be assessed and changes can be incorporated. Step 3, selection of appropriate learning processes or situations. Step 4, evaluation techniques. Both the process and product of the learning activities can be evaluated to see whether the specific objectives have been realized. In India, at secondary school level, The national level curriculum for different subjects have been developed by National Council for Educational Research and Training (NCERT), and at state level the State Council for Educational Research and Training (SCERT) make adaptations based on contextual variables, especially in relation to learning a foreign language. Curriculum guides, teachers' handbooks or source books are developed along with the textbooks to ensure uniformity in the framework of curricular process, content organization and planning. The paradigm shift for a teaching methodology to a learning methodology implies that language classrooms are learning centered, a skill oriented approach with the use of a wide variety of materials and tools that extend beyond the limitation of a prescribed textbook, and continued assessment of objectives, content, learning tasks and evaluation. Essentials in lesson planning. In a constructivist pedagogy, the teacher guides the learner in using the language to acquire it, especially through activities. The two theories differ in the extent of learner involvement and the role of the teacher. Instructional objectives. The objectives must be in terms of people's experience, in simple specific terms with the learning situation, in realistic terms covering cognitive, affective and psychomotor domains, socially acceptable, be developmental in purpose. Performance objectives. Performance which describes what the learner will be able to do, the conditions under which the learner will perform, the standard which specifies how well the learner is to perform, ability to participate in short conversations and express basic courtesy, ability to handle communicative situations for survival in the target culture. Learning objectives. The learning objectives are stated in terms of what learners should know and be able to do with the language. The objectives are measurable and describe what the learners will be able to do with the target language. The performance in the language will be indicative one's ability to manipulate the skills. Action verbs like compares, asks, constructs are used to indicate the abilities. The statements also carry the context in which these actions takes place. Content. The content of learning also will vary based on the objectives. The content in English as a second language can be language, spoken language, written language and kinesis. Para-language includes features such as tone of voice, choice of dialect, pronunciation, spelling, accepted vocabulary and correct grammar. Literature. It conveys the message of foreign culture. Pieces of literature are selected for listening and reading. Communication. Texts that provide opportunities for meaningful interaction are included. Culture. Learners are to be made familiar with the work of art, architecture, value system and social culture of the native speakers of the target language. Learning experience or teaching learning activity. Ensure active participation of the students. Analyze the content material and organize it into small steps. Use prerequisites and common examples to ensure assimilation. Learning experience should be in accordance with the learner variables. How the student learns is more important than what he learns. Development of language skill must be the aim. Life related situation must be referred to. Include enactive experiences. Provide immediate feedback. Application of educational technology. Carry real world language or situations in tasks. Evaluation. The realization of objectives is considered as an indicator of the effectiveness of the process. Strategies like performing real world tasks, integrating language skills meaningfully, application of linguistic elements in meaningful communication make evaluation reliable. Conclusion. While planning, ensure clarity of objectives, unity of the lesson, integration of skills, variety in planning, creativity in planning, maximum student involvement, live active engagement, continued facilitation and meaningful activities. From the discussion, we have understood that at the planning phase, the teacher has to think about the content and learners. Based on these aspects, the teaching phase will follow. The practicing teacher has to ensure the effect of planning and teaching phases. Thus, a third phase, a reflection phase, also may be incorporated into the lesson plan. It is self-reflection on achievement, effectiveness and about the changes that one has to make in the next plan. The process of planning to ensure language acquisition depends upon many factors related to the objectives to be realized, the content, learning process, learner characteristics, environmental variables and the techniques of evaluation. An efficient foreign language teacher has to adapt to the situations and identify appropriate strategies to develop a language acquisition environment. We have realized that based on the principles and variables of planning, daily lesson plans are to be developed by every teacher systematically with the phases of specifying objectives, pre-assessing learners, selecting appropriate learning processes and techniques of evaluation. We have understood the different types of objectives, nature of content, learning activities and evaluation. Before we attend the next unit, please try to answer the following questions. A lesson plan is the blueprint of teaching learning process. How? Mention the 4 phases in pre-planning. Analyze the English course book prescribed for Standard 8 and enlist some of the variety content items like language, literature, communication and culture. Here are some books for your references. Ideas for Lesson Planning by A. Haynes, Continuum International, USA. Lesson Planning by D. Butt, 2008, Continuum International, USA. Teacher's Handbook, Contextualized Language Instruction by J. L. Shrum and E. W. Gleason, 2nd edition, 2000, Heineck and Heineck, USA. Hope you enjoyed the session. See you next time. Till then, bye.